Well, good evening once again, everybody. Having a little bit of mic troubles. We've been on through the duration of the evening and overnight tonight. Our mics are giving us a little bit of trouble, but we've got that solved, and it's good to see all of you once again. And hopefully you're staying dry and safe out there. And hopefully you got to stay inside and didn't have to venture out too much through the rest of the evening. Here's a look at the current setup of radar across the area. Down further towards the south, reds and yellows more prevalent now out into the open Gulf. The reason for that we'll get to momentarily. Let's take a deeper dive into what's going on with our severe weather setup and what we're going to see through the rest of the evening, as I feel like our severe weather threat is changed as well as shifted in terms of its likelihood and also its areas that are under the gun here. Firstly, what I want to draw your attention to is this flash flood warning in this blinking yellow box here. This isn't your typical flash flood warning. It's actually a considerable flash flood warning. It was upgraded by the National Weather Service because of rainfall already received here and already continuing to see heavy rainfall at the moment. And as that's occurring here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, keep in mind rainfall doesn't take much to start to stack up. When we haven't seen rainfall on a widespread scale in a while, you start adding rainfall on top of that. That's when we start running into problems. With that in mind, take note that areas in this particular box here for the flash flood warning did see between 3 to 5 inches earlier today, and right now adding a couple more inches on top of that, and that's why we're seeing that considerable flash flood warning in place. With that being said, I'll move out of the way and adjust things here for you. In terms of what you're looking at, I'll let you get a widespread look at the overall radar setup across the Mississippi Gulf Coast and also what's going on in terms of what's down the pipe, what's coming up next here towards the coast. And the answer for that, we do have the potential for some areas to maybe see a strong to severe storm throughout the remainder of the night hours into tomorrow morning. But the reason things changed and these storms moved through, definitely saw that severe weather come through the area more so tonight than we did yesterday. But remember, we had two main modes of severe weather we've been talking about over the past few days. Mode 1 came through yesterday, and I'll actually step off the screen and pull up our radar from earlier in the daytime hours and show you a loop of what we're talking about. As we move through the daytime hours of yesterday into today, specifically last night into this morning, the weather certainly gave us a few different clues as to what was going to occur. Now here's a look at your futurecast. Just want to give you a quick tease at what we're going to talk about in a moment. But quickly, let's review what's happened throughout the daytime hours. Earlier today, actually had a production assistant come in and say his hometown in central Mississippi experienced some severe weather and some straight line winds, and was wondering if it was straight line winds or tornadoes. So we dove into that as well. Here's what we're looking at right now at your clouds and radar imagery. This will give you a general idea of the current setup as you just saw. But earlier today, here is what has occurred across the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, thanks for tuning in here. I know that it's late, but I just wanted to hop on here and ease some folks' minds if you're worried about severe weather later on this evening into tomorrow morning. It's not saying that it's not a possibility anymore, but our overall pattern has changed. The look at the radar right now does show those heavier reds and yellows still present in the area. Momentarily, I'll show you why it matters which radar you use when looking at the weather during situations like this. But here's the current setup and what happened throughout the daytime hours. We'll start earlier today, this afternoon, up to right now. This is the remnants of what came through last night into this morning. And then out towards the west, we saw a bit of a lull. We did see a few showers and thunderstorms linger across the area, but the middle part of your day was pretty much a lull or a pause in our severe weather across the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and definitely a pause in terms of widespread thunderstorms. And as that happened, our next batch of thunderstorms was gearing up out towards the west. You can just see it here on the left side of your screen. And watch as I put it in motion here, you'll see those showers and thunderstorms on the widespread scale move through Louisiana, the southern part of the state, as well as south central Louisiana, before making their way towards south central Mississippi as well. And what's important to note here is as those storms moved right along the southern part of Louisiana, we did see a few cells that provoked tornado warnings that were reissued a few times, meaning that that steadiness of that storm to continue producing circulation concern meant that it was indecently unstable air and air more favorable for severe development. But as we approached Mississippi with these storms, more specifically just to the west of our area, just to the west of Picayune here on the western side of the WXXV viewing area. That's when we saw a water spout start to develop, and we're wondering if that water spout would continue on to land, give us a general idea of what was to come through the rest of the evening here in southern Mississippi. Thankfully, though, we didn't see that tornado warning extended into our viewing area, which is why we didn't hop on air. But we did see a few destructive severe thunderstorm warnings, large hail and damaging winds. Some areas out towards the west for sure, like Baton Rouge, Orleans Parish, saw some wind damage throughout the earlier hours of the night. But here, I'll stop this loop for you and go back to radar because I want to examine a few things. Firstly, you remember that first line of storms that moved through the area last night into today? That was round 1 of 2. Remember how we said that that would set the stage for what we would see tonight? Not that it would rule out severe thunderstorms tonight or even heavier showers and thunderstorms along with rainfall. But depending on how long those storms lasted into the midday hours, talking about those isolated midday storms that gave us that break we were just referring to, those storms actually helped to eat up some of that instability in our atmosphere later on into the late afternoon, early evening. And I'll show you why that matters in just a moment. So let's go back to what we call analysis mode here, and we'll take a look at the radar once again. And as we go back to analysis mode, it puts us right back at this radar image. I'm going to switch it over to Jackson just to prove a point here. As you switch to Jackson, here's something I want to note. This is a badly accrued radar image, and what we call attenuation tends to happen when you shoot through radars shoot through the beam actually. You shoot your radar beam through the storms and rainfall. What that does, I'll draw it out for you on screen here. This is attenuation at its finest. Notice how it's not as crisp and clean here from the Jackson radar site, and there's a couple different reasons for that. Notice the positioning of this particular radar in Jackson. We have 3 radars that we use for our WXXV viewing area to give us the closest actual look at it. We have more that we could add in, but here's what I'm referring to. This is why we ran into some problems seeing storms earlier in the evening. Notice the position here of the Jackson radar, and as I take the pencil tool and draw it out, what you'll notice here is that radar's actual position up in the central part of the state gives it a good shot at storms in the central part of Mississippi and southwestern Mississippi as well. But look how far it has to shoot down to our storms in order to get a good image of those. And when you have showers and thunderstorms across central Mississippi, it's not only shooting far in the atmosphere and shooting higher in the atmosphere as well in terms of height, it's also coming through some of those heavier showers and thunderstorms, which beats up that beam a little bit and makes it a little harder for that radar beam to reach its target. It eventually does most times, but as it does so, it comes with a little bit of attenuation, which is the word we use when you get radar images just like this. And you see the radar is not as clean as it would be should we shoot into this storm from Mobile. And it all goes back to the basis of radar and what we're seeing in terms of how the radar operates on a simple level. What that means is, as I clear this out here, promise this has a purpose here, and we'll get you back to your regular scheduled program in a bit, but this all relates to what we saw tonight. Radars shoot out into the atmosphere, and as the Earth is curved, you don't always get you really don't ever get a straight line directly at your target. As the radar extends further into the atmosphere, say we're shooting at Mobile here, or from Mobile, you have the radar at Mobile's location shooting into our storms on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The reason we often would use the radars, either one, the Slidell radar, which was recently moved to Hammond, or the Fort Polk radar for storms out towards the west instead of Mobile, is this is what happens when you shoot with a beam that's too far away. You start to get Mobile shooting out into the atmosphere, and as the Earth is curved, that beam doesn't go in a straight line. It eventually goes up, and the further it gets away from the radar, the higher in the atmosphere it encounters these thunderstorms. And of course, what we care about here, we care about all of the levels of the atmosphere to some degree, but what really pertains to us is the lower levels of the atmosphere, because that's what you see and feel back at home. And as that's the case, this beam shoots out further in the atmosphere, and getting a higher look at the atmosphere only is advantageous in certain situations. We really want that lower level scan to see what's going on, especially in cases of tornadic development. If you could have a tornado or two developing, you could really shoot down to the surface and see if that circulation or mesocyclone is elevated there. That's not necessarily pertaining to our forecast at the moment, but it did earlier this evening. We did have a lot of trouble getting scans of the radar imagery in the central part of our viewing area, especially as those storms were coming in from the west. Now, I know I've been referring to the radar site in Mobile, but the reason that we had trouble understanding what was going on once those storms hit the western sides of the viewing area is we had heavy thunderstorms in central Mississippi between us and the Jackson site, and that site probably had just a bit too much in terms of heavy showers and thunderstorms to see those storms on a clear level. And here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we had that site blocked off by the heavy rainfall. Mobile had a wall of wind and water from earlier between us and the radar. And then Fort Polk, well out to the west, had plenty of showers and thunderstorms between it as well. So we were between a rock and a hard place to get those adequate scans, which begs to differ. The question I received earlier tonight, I didn't quite get to answer it on the 10 p.m. show. What we were talking about was why do the meteorologists tend to dive in depth into pixels and other parts of the radar if it's giving you the picture that it's reading at that particular moment? In simple terms, that's just the answer to the question is we dive into that because the radar is not actually a straight up reading of what's going on at that particular moment. Think about how the radar works. Understand nobody asked for a lesson in radar terminology and how the radar works this evening, but it actually pertains to what we saw tonight. So I'll briefly get through it and overlay what you're going to see the rest of the evening into tomorrow. But the radar itself isn't actually a reading of what's going on at that exact particular moment. The radar shoots out into the storm, and as that happens, the radars, take Mobile, we use Mobile again, say it's shooting out towards these storms on the western side of the viewing area. And as it does so, it shoots that beam out, it has to hit the target and then return to the radar site. Now, in terms of our naked eye and how we digest information, this happens very quickly on a much quicker scale than we're able to comprehend. But in terms of the radar imagery, it takes time for that beam to shoot out, come back to the radar, and depending on the type of radar you have, whether it's new or it's old, the processing times are different, but regardless, all radars need times to process and render the image, which then spits out what you have right here. With that being said, let's put this in motion and give you an idea of what you're going to see later on tonight and into tomorrow morning. Promise this all has a purpose here, and I'll explain why I hopped on here and more in depth in just a moment, but let's take a quick look at what you've got. You do have those severe thunderstorm capabilities diminishing across the area, especially out into the open Gulf and here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We do have a few flash flood warnings in place here over southern Mississippi and south central Mississippi as well. If you're just joining us on Facebook Live or on the television as well, we wanted to hop on here and give you an idea of what was occurring because we did have an outage due to our internet earlier and wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. The weather was really ramping up there and continued to cause us quite a stir just around the 10 o'clock time frame, which I know when a lot of you were tuning in to see what was going to happen overnight, that signal may have been interrupted, as was our post as well. So let's give you a quick update. Once again, if you're joining us, a few flash flood warnings in place here. Earlier, the National Weather Service did upgrade a few of those to the considerable tag, which means that we're seeing rainfall on the scale of 3 to 5 inches accumulated in areas across the coast. Add in another couple inches on top of that, and then you've got even more rainfall to deal with there on the southern part of Mississippi and especially along the coast as well. But here's the current motion of the thunderstorms. The thunderstorms at the moment are continuing to move off towards the east, and as they do so, take a look at the motion of these storms. I'll move the toolbar out of the way. Notice how they're a little bit more slow moving. It seems like they almost lost their steam, if you will, or their drive. The reason for that is they're encountering an atmosphere with a little less wind shear, that instability much lower than we saw earlier today. That thanks to those thunderstorms that moved through during the middle part of the day that we weren't concerned with for severe capabilities, but more so concerned with in terms of what we would see later on in the evening affected by those storms during the mid part of the day. But luckily for us, it did eat up a decent amount of storm fuel, if you will, and left us with, though the potential was still there for sure and we had plenty of instability, we did have less in terms of what the storms could take advantage of this evening. And flash flooding is a concern right now. I hear it outside at the moment, and the reason I want to touch on this is because I know a lot of you here on the coast work very early into the morning hours, and this is very important as you head out the door because flash flooding is certainly a major concern. I want to hop over to a few graphics that I meant to show last night, but with the severe weather ongoing, didn't really get that capability because we had to examine radar and talk about the task immediately at hand. Here's what I'm referring to. Let's go down to the severe weather graphics I looked at last night, and then we'll hop into a few different graphics explaining where we came from and where we're heading into tomorrow before I give you back to your regularly scheduled programming. Here is a look at some flash flooding graphics. I want to briefly explain these. This is a big problem across the coast at the moment. Rural impacts are what we start noticing first. As excessive rainfall rates raise those streams and river levels, that starts spreading further than the banks of the rivers and streams, and then we start transitioning into a few different categories of flash flooding. This is the first category. We call it the rural category of flash flooding. See here, the graphic explains it pretty quickly. It's very simple and not hard to understand at all. Those streams and rivers start to overflow, and then that starts the transitional pattern. And no matter where you're at, this is true no matter where you're at in the country and in the world as well. Then you go on to the urban impacts. This is for you folks that live more so inland. Maybe you live in a place with less trees, less vegetation, and more asphalt and concrete. Well, this can pertain to you as well. That water definitely penetrates the soil easier than the pavement, which means the rural areas will actually be in a better setup in terms of water absorption. That's no surprise. You know that asphalt and the texture are very hard and resistant to absorbing any materials, much less water. And as that happens, the roadways start to pile up quickly and those storm drains start to get overwhelmed. It can also be overwhelmed quickly with hail, tree limbs, other debris as well. And here's a quick look at what you could do out there. Really not all that hard, folks. Patience, it can save your life and certainly extend you on to the next day, whereas a quick, hastily decision just to get across the street or a few feet further across that running bed of water could result in a disaster. But here is a quick animation I've got up on the screen just to kind of illustrate how much water it takes to move each of these objects right here. 6 inches of water is enough to sweep away a person, and you crank it up to a car here, 12 inches of water. Could sweep away a car. It's 12 inches. Keep that in mind. Just strictly 12 inches could wash your car off the road. And then finally, you have a truck. A lot of folks down here do as well. 18 inches of water. That's all you need to sweep that truck right off the roadway. Here's quickly a recap of the overall setup we had, and I'll promise I'll get you right back onto your programming in just a moment. But as I mentioned earlier, just a few moments ago, if you're just joining us or you've been watching us on television as well, all three of our channels, I wanted to break in because the flash flooding risk across the area is so pertinent. And here on the coast, we have a lot of our residents that get up quite early to head out to work or school. And as they do that, they find themselves this morning under a very concerning risk for severe weather in terms of flash flooding. That gets discarded a lot along with straight line winds. And really, it deserves its due diligence and its respect because water does a lot of amazing things, and one of those is move heavy objects with a little less force than you might expect. We did have a couple round of storms that popped through the early morning hours of your Monday. That chance for strong to severe storms was really starting to ramp up. You see the upper level pattern here and the moisture flow across the central part of the country, and that extended down to us eventually as the frontal system moved near our location. Of course, you see that low pressure moving, and it moved a lot of that moisture near our general area. The frontal system actually hasn't passed our location just yet. We'll begin to do so as we move towards your Wednesday. Our overall setup for your daytime hours of Monday, this is what happened out west. And remember, things are all in motion here. The atmosphere is trying to reach stability that it will never reach. And as one area is stable, that means one area is not. And today, we found ourselves in the area that was unstable through the mid-time hours of the day, the daytime hours as well. And also last night into this morning, and we finished off today, we are right now with that severe risk as well. Here's the upper level flow. Notice that trough digging down there. The upper levels of the atmosphere, remember you got that synoptic scale that's below the global scale. So if we do it in order, global, synoptic, mesoscale, and microscale. The synoptic scale is what we normally see troughs and ridges on. Mesoscale is more what I showed you earlier tonight in terms of what was happening on a statewide viewpoint. But that ridge continued to dig and will do so into your daytime hours of tomorrow. A couple more rounds of thunderstorms possible into the morning hours. These graphics, of course, just showing what could happen on a broad scale into the daytime hours tomorrow. It's just important to note that we could see those showers and thunderstorms develop. And if we do, most likely we will see them more brief than we saw tonight, but there's still a possibility into the morning hours. This yellow shade here does show us just on the fringe of what's possible. And that's for good reason, because most likely the showers and thunderstorms have moved off towards the east if we're talking about the heaviest and the most concerning of those. And your overall setup out west once again for your Tuesday continues to show some development off towards the west, and that will begin to affect our pattern into the rest of the week. Synoptic analysis does show showers and thunderstorms developing across your Monday, which we saw verify today, and then into tomorrow that system moves into the eastern U.S. This is a different version of the same graphic I like to show because it gives color to the overall movement of the pattern and shows what will happen across the area. But with that being said, let's briefly go through one more. I promise get you back to either bed or your regularly scheduled programming. Not quite sure what comes on this evening, this time of night, but I promise I'll get you back to it momentarily. Here's another look at your radar and the current setup across the area. Actually, the latest from the National Weather Service. I'll see what the National Weather Service has said most recently. We've got the Weather Service New Orleans, and they've said currently that they've just continued to watch these areas in the Sound, which is out towards the southern part of the viewing area and into the Gulf. We also have the Weather Service Mobile that warns our eastern counties, and they're continuing to watch the convection with this mesoscale convective system that has been winding down over the past few hours. And as it moves east, that stable air mass is going to help diminish that as well. And as they note, there could still be a strong storm or two overnight into the interior or southeast Mississippi, but it's not as likely. The main threat is now the heavy rainfall and localized flash flooding. According to Don at the Weather Service Mobile office, he says 2 inches plus of rainfall has fallen over the past hour. All of the heavier rainfall will move east into the flash flood watch area, which pertains to areas outside the WXXV viewing area, being the Alabama coastal counties and the western Florida panhandle overnight. If the trends continue, flash flood warnings may be required. And as for the last Weather Service office that covers us, Jackson, Mississippi, also issuing some flash flood guidances this evening. So as you're seeing on your screen, dramatic potential has definitely diminished. You do have a few severe thunderstorm warnings that were issued here on the Mississippi coast, but those have diminished as well. What you're looking at tonight, definitely some heavy rainfall, and if you're still with us on Facebook Live, I haven't looked at it yet. I can't see the other side of the phone, but we definitely appreciate it, and sorry for cutting into your programming, but never apologize in the name of safety and preparedness as well. And I've been on here for a couple minutes now. Earlier, we did see that flash flooding was starting to become a concern, and that quickly became one of the main concerns for the rest of the evening. Luckily, hail remained on the lower end of the spectrum for most of the viewing area, not quite out west, as we did see that damaging, considerable severe thunderstorm warning that moved through the area. One more look at the radar, and then we're actually going to send it back. I'll keep my promise this time, but here's a look at what's going on across the area. Reds and yellows certainly more prevalent. Showers continue to come down. Actually, one more graphic that you will appreciate, and it'll just illustrate what I've said to you, and really spoken a lot in word. It'll illustrate to you what's happened in graphic form. I'll show you the rainfall accumulation across the Mississippi Gulf Coast over the past 12 to 24 hours. As we're taking a look at that, this is what we're currently seeing. I'm going to pull that up on our links machine here, and it will show the rainfall, particularly for the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And over the past 24 hours, mainly, keep in mind, this pertains mostly to the past couple hours and then last night's system. Here's what you're looking at. Rainfall down by the coast, well over 2 inches in some areas like Biloxi. Ocean Springs reader is not quite picking up on the numbers correctly, but currently what we're seeing in the middle part of the viewing area. How about this? Saucier, almost 6 inches of rainfall within a day span. Most likely going to continue to see rainfall through the evening, though it may be lighter and also less intense. When you almost have 6 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period, that's enough by itself to cause a flooding concern in cases of emergency. Add on some rainfall on top of that, and that's when you have a problem. But here's another look at the rainfall totals across the area. Once again, Ocean Springs did accumulate some rainfall. It's just their reader has not quite caught up yet. But it's almost the midnight time frame here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It is just about that time, and we are going to head into your Tuesday morning. And as that happens, let's give you one look at that 7-day forecast. Why not before you head out the door? Because we haven't had a lot of time for that this evening, and I promise that will be the actual end of this cut-in here. The reason we went live is because it really is a concern to life and property here on the coast. With the area surrounded by so much water, we often forget that rainfall could be the reason that flooding is a concern here, and it certainly is at the moment. Once again, here is a look at that 7-day forecast. What you're going to see through the rest of the evening is this. We're going to continue to be warm tomorrow. As clouds do break towards the mid part of the day back into the upper 80s. Humidity is certainly there. Wednesday, though, I know that temperature is a little scary, but the humidity value does come down, and as it does so, that's when we'll start to see temperatures much more comfortable. I know it sounds crazy to say 90 degrees here will feel more comfortable, but I promise as the humidity values drop, that comfortability will return on a smaller scale. Now, it won't feel quite comfortable as it could be if it was 20 degrees lower, but pick your poison here. It's the spring season, almost mid-May, and we haven't seen that much in terms of severe weather and rainfall over the past couple weeks, but now we are this week, and by the end of the week here, here's what you're looking at. Maybe a few more chances for showers and thunderstorms come towards the end of your work week, maybe with a severe potential, but not quite seeing that at the moment. Another system out towards the north and west continues to provide that ability for showers and thunderstorms to develop. But as of now, current setup, flash flooding, high winds still present across the area. Definitely be careful and take your precautions as you head out the door. If there's anything else that we could do for you or I could do for you, as long as I'm awake the rest of this evening, I'll continue to monitor those showers and thunderstorms as well. And we don't normally cut into programming like this unless there's a tornado warning or considerable severe thunderstorm warning. But the good news is it's often left up to your broadcast meteorologist. And the reason I'm talking to you folks here on television side of things, and especially you folks on the Facebook side, if you didn't quite join us on the TV end of the spectrum, is life and property is our mission, as it is for the Weather Service. If your life or property is threatened, we're going to do whatever we can to help you out, and that's why we're in the business, and that's what we'll continue to do here at WXXB, your weather authority. Called that for a reason, and we try to live up to that here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So to you on television and you on the Facebook Live, we certainly thank you, and thank you for your trust. With that, we're going to send it back to your regularly scheduled programming. I'm meteorologist Trey Tonnessen. Have a great Tuesday.